For this video, I will be talking about the grouping function in Power BI and also about pivoting and ungrouping data in Power BI. So these are quite important ideas, especially or yeah, notably if you want to aggregate data. Let me find the slide here. So some examples will be dealing with, for instance, is suppose you have this data set containing the exam scores for digital method scores. But as you might remember, we also have the gender for each student. So how would we get the distribution of males and females that took the exam? So how many male students were there and how many female students were there? So that's an aggregation. You start with a fairly large data set with 120 students. And you aggregate that to from 120 rows to 2 rows. So one row for male and the number of male students, and one row for females containing the number of female students. So that's a grouping function. There's some other examples, but let's see how this works in practice. So we open up Power BI. And as you can see here, I still have the previous session saved as a PBX file. So I just open that and it opens my data here right on the screen. So let's go to the Power Query editor using the Transform Data button. So, and here we can see our two data sets. Sorry, so let's first look at the gender distribution for this data set. As I talked about in a previous video, it might be useful here to copy the current data set. So how do you do that? You just click on the data set you want to copy, Control C, Control V. And let's rename it. Just double click it. You can name it however you like. So what we want to do is to group this column, or to group our data set based on this column. So we do that by going to the transform option in the top ribbon. And then on the leftmost option, you have the group by function. So we click or we select, well, you don't necessarily have to select a column. We can select another column, do the group by. So in the column you selected will be shown here, but you can choose another column. So we want to group by gender, and we want a count of the gender. So we want a count of the number of females and males. Of course, there's several other options. I'm not going to deal with them here because they're basically, or you could classify them as data analysis rather than data wrangling, but the difference isn't always black and white here. But for now, let's just focus on the count. So we want a count of the rows, and let's name our column like this, and we just press OK. So as expected, you now have a data set with only 2 rows. So one row for the males, there's 32 males in the data set, and a row for the females, we have 88 females in the data set. So that's the grouping of the gender distribution. Let's do this with the timeline data. Let's also do this with the timeline data. So we copy paste. And what can we do here? For instance, we could group by user ID because we have several tweets in this data set, and one user can send more than one tweet. So if we do a group by on the user ID, we will have a count for each user on the number of tweets this user has sent in this data set. So we rename it to tweet distribution. We select a column and we click on the group by, and we get the same option here. So we have ID of the user, tweet count, you can name that whatever you like, and we do again a number or a count of the number of rows. So let's see what happens if we do that. Right. So again, you see here the number of rows is the number of users. We have a lot of missings here, so let's just filter those out. So now we have for the first user sent 4 tweets, the second user has sent 91 tweets, and so on. So we can make this a little bit more complicated. So let's delete this filtering, and let's delete the grouping here. I'm working in this pane now. So let's see. This is for another video. I will go more in depth, but let's see what happens. Suppose I wanted to not only have a grouping by the user, but I also want to have an overview for each user, how many tweets he or she sends per month. So for each month that the user has sent a tweet, I want a count of those tweets. So we can do some date and time manipulations in Power BI, and you can do that here. So if we just select a column and we click on the date and then go to the month and just check month. So it reads extract a month component from the date time values in the selected column. So that's what we want. We only want to keep the month, so not a full date. So we click on that. You see, and this changes your date to just the number of the month. Okay, now we want to group by the ID of the user and also on the tweet date or the month. So we select group by. We go to the advanced options, and then here we can add another group. So we have the ID of the user, that's the first thing we want to group by, and then we have the tweet date, that's the second column we want to group by. So count ID month. Press OK. And now we see here okay, sorry for that. So what you see here now is the first user only has sent tweets in the 5th month, and he sent a total of 4 tweets. This is different for the second user because this is the second user, and you see here that in month 2 he sent 10 tweets, in month 11 he has sent 5, he or she has sent 5 tweets, and so on. So now you have performed a group by based on the ID of a user and on the tweet date, so on the month these tweets were sent. Okay, so we can keep that. Another thing I wanted to show was how to pivot. Isn't that working? That's strange. Was how to pivot data. So in the slides you see some more examples on how to group. Now pivoting is very similar to grouping in a sense. A pivot returns the rows into columns, and unpivoting is the other way around. It turns columns into rows. So let's see how that works in Power BI itself. There you go. So suppose we wanted to have, and this is also, pivoting works really well more for the data analysis operations, but I will show it here for the data wrangling because it's important to understand the logic behind it. So let's suppose we wanted to have a column, or we have this column with gender 0 and 1s. So if we would pivot this data, this would provide us with not one but two columns. So a column for the males and a column for the females. Now if we would do that, so how can you do that? You have the pivot option here, so in the transform option, and the unpivot columns here. So suppose we wanted to pivot on gender. He's of course also asking with what these two columns need to be filled. Now in this case this might not make a lot of sense. You'll see why. So let's take for instance the score, or no, the number of classes attended. So we pivot on gender, so we create two columns. And you see here, so that's why it doesn't always make a lot of sense to do it. So you have this column males and females. So the first one is a male that attended one class, but these are mutually exclusive because you can be a male and a female both. So this is a female. She attended two classes, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So this is just a restructuring of your data. Now let's undo that. So often it's more useful to first delete some columns and think about what you want to have a distribution on. So if we select these columns, and if we pivot in the score on the digital methods exam, and we do that, that makes a lot more sense because it's really aggregating the data now. So you have some number for the male students and some number for the female students. Now this number doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's see what's happening here. So if we go to the options here of what we did, you can see in the advanced options on how the Power BI is going to aggregate the scores from the digital methods exam. So in this case, it takes a sum. So it sums up all the scores of the male students, which is a total of 337, and it sums up all the scores of the female students, which totals to 955. So this doesn't make a lot of sense to do. And now we're not dealing with data wrangling anymore in a sense, but with data analysis, so descriptive analysis. So it makes a lot more sense to average these scores. So if we do that, we get the average, we would get the average on the score of the digital methods exam distributed for gender. So, and now this makes a lot more sense. So we have a score for the male students of 10.35, and we do have a score for the female students of 10.58. Now let's see, so that's the basic idea of pivoting your table. You could actually, you could do the same probably with the group by function. So in this table we did a group by, but you could probably also do it so probably we don't even need to do it like this. Yeah. So the group by function does the same here. Or you could do it the same. You just get, here you get the rows with the gender and the gender count. And here you get the columns with gender. So it's just structured differently. So this is the pivot table. This is the group by. It gives you the same results. Let's see what happens if we unpivot this. Okay, sorry, there's somebody at the door, so I'll have to pause this. Okay, so where were we? We have this group by data table, and we also, no, yeah, wait, what did I do? Yeah, I already unpivoted it. So we have this pivoted data table. So, and if we select those column and we click on unpivot, we get exactly the same data table as we obtained with the group by function. So that's in a nutshell the group by and the pivot and unpivot function. So these are really important operations that you will probably use a lot. And it shouldn't surprise you if you've seen the other videos. So let's close and apply this, that you can also do this in the graphical interface of Power BI. So of course, now I don't have a data set left. Let's go back to the Power Query editor and undo some of the changes here. So let's undo that. And we close and apply. So now if we wanted to have a look at gender and the score on the digital methods exam in a table. So you see again that he's in the graphical editor doing the same. So we have the options here. So we click them here. And again, you get something, or you get, as we have seen previously, the sum of these values. But of course, you can also, if you click here, take the same operations that you could in the Power Query editor. So if we ask for the average score, we will get the same results. So it really depends on what you want to use it for. If you want to use this or these operations just to make some kind of graphical representation um, to compare the average score of male and female students, or if you want to do some more data operations on it or other data operations on it. It really depends on what you want to do with that specific data.